From here on out, you belong with Alpha Company 439. Hurry up! We need to move!
About to change the lives!
For the next 10 weeks,
Let's go, let's go, let's go!
you'll go through some intense training. Get tired later. In order to earn hurry up, run! The right to be called a United States soldier.
I'm glad to finally be a part of something bigger than myself.
We're gonna put a lot into you.
Let's go, we run everywhere, trainees! You have to jump off this wall.
Welcome to the Army.
Hey.
I did it, Mom.
I'm a soldier. Not many can say that.
Hi, I'm Tova Leiter, director of NIFA Q&A series. And tonight, we would like to introduce our panelists, Colonel Jack Jacob, David Gale, and Chase Millsap. You read all about them, and now you get to meet them in person, pandemic style. Welcome all. I thank you all for coming, and we can't wait to see the series, hopefully soon. We're going to hear a little bit more about it later on, hopefully. But first, I wanted to know, how did this project come into fruition? And Colonel Jack, I understand that maybe the idea started with you.
Well, a few years ago, I wrote a book called Basic, available at good bookstores everywhere. It's effectively just a book about anecdotes of basic training and boot camp collected from people in all the services. And it occurred to me when I was at NBC that it would make a pretty good series. So I and my business partner at NBC News, Val Nicholas, tried to talk NBC into doing it. And they said it was a great idea, but they could never get themselves organized enough to do it. And we despaired of ever getting it done. Interestingly, I could get it done because I knew people at the top of the food chain in the Army. Years ago, when I was a captain and a major, I was teaching international relations and comparative politics at West Point. And among my students was a guy named Ray Odierno, who eventually grew up to be chief of staff of the Army, and Marty Dempsey, who became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Anyway, I talked to them about doing this. They said, yeah, you can have access. But couldn't get NBC to finally do it. And so Val knew Chase and went to Chase, known him for years and years. And Chase went to Blumhouse and David, and the rest is history.
I'm surprised to see the credit for Blumhouse, because it doesn't look like that's the kind of thing they do. They usually do this incredible horror movies that are fantastic. I'd like to get back end of those. But how come Chase, how come you went to Blumhouse?
It's a good question. David and I actually both went to Blumhouse. We were in the same meeting. And it was one of the things, as we were sort of figuring out what's the team that we have to assemble for the show. Because as Colonel Jacob said, it's about the idea, but it's also about how you can execute it.
Absolutely.
And so we were trying to find the right partner to help us, one, get in the door with the network, but two, really make sure that from a production standpoint, we could do all of the things right. And you're right, Blumhouse is known for doing horror movies. That is not what they are known for. Yeah. And however, they had a team that was stepping up to do television, and David and I were in the room, and we'd mentioned this idea, something we wanted to do, and they just bid on it immediately. And so we found ourselves with a partner that has a history of production, right. And we were able to come in and really help them understand the military world, which is right. Totally different.
Right. There's Hollywood boot camp and there's the real Army.
That's right. There's two different boot camps, and somewhere in the middle we worked.
So and what was included in the package that you sold to Quibi? So it was Blumhouse, We Are the Mighty, You, Chase, were already on as a director.
So, and David can help me with this one. So we came in, so I work for a company called We Are the Mighty, which is very military and veteran specific. All of the projects we do are related to the military, and it's about celebrating service. So boot camp was just, for us, that's day one. That's everything. That's our whole world. But we knew as a young company that we needed the Blumhouses of the world. So we brought them, and with David's help from some of his experience at MTV, we brought them a short version of a sizzle video of what the show could be, what it could look like. And then from there, we were able to create what the episodes, the 10 episodes could look like and budget it out. The Army actually helped us out. Because boot camp is broken down over 10 weeks, that helped that there were 10 episodes. That made it very simple for us. And they also have 3 phases. So we were able to really come up with a plan of how we wanted to shoot the show. But we really didn't know who the characters were going to be, and we didn't know what we were going to see until we got there. So it was about really the high vision, and David and some of the people he knew helped us put that together.
So you had a general plan.
Yeah.
We're going to do 10 weeks and we'll go there. And once we're there, we figure out how we exactly going to do it. So a little documentary style and a little, fantastic.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
By the way, Blumhouse is really into the television space, really aren't focused on horror. That's kind of what they're known for in movies. They do have a horror series on Hulu, I think, but they're really broad based, and so they have a lot of resources, and we're talking to Quibi a lot and other networks. So we pitched multiple networks, and the key here is the sizzle reel and the access. What people realize when you present anything, the one thing that you have, if you have access, unique access, then you've got something people want. Yeah. And that was something that Colonel Jacobs could get us, and had that kind of trust from both the Army as well as from the production community that knew that this was the real thing, because this is not something you want to fake, and this is not something the Army is going to let you do. And they hadn't done it in over 20 years, given that kind of access. So when pitching any show, whether if you have a celebrity, that's one thing. If you have an amazing idea that nobody's ever heard of, and then another thing is access to a world that people haven't seen.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes a village to get it all done. Mm-hmm. Incredible.
And I have to give, everybody else is a veteran. I'm not a veteran. I started We Are the Mighty, but Val Nicholas, who I was meeting with at NBC, had worked with Jack on this project. And, that was the other thing. I think the sort of idea of it being by veterans for a larger community was such a also important, compelling aspect of this. So, I think that you can't understate how important that was also for the Army to have the trust in a crew that would be coming onto a base.
There's something else to keep in mind, and that's this. Back when I first came in the Army, there was a draft, and a lot of people served. During the Second World War, we had something like 20 million people in uniform. Now we have a relatively small number of young people who are defending 330 million of us. And so the whole idea of being in uniform, of going through basic training and boot camp, is something most people don't experience. Ironically, that has a tendency to make this much more attractive. It's something most people don't get to see. They're not involved in it. It's something of, it's like the backstory of national defense, and it makes it really attractive from an economic standpoint.
Absolutely. I can tell you that I loved basic training because I lost a lot of weight and I got into shape and stuff like that. But anyway, no, I totally understand what you're saying. And I have to say, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I think if you look at that trailer, you really want to know more. There's no question about it. And there's the feeling that it's real, you know what I mean? Which, yeah. I wanted to ask you, want to ask all of you. You are the chair of the Veteran Advancement Program at the New York Film Academy. What is the goal and what is the agenda of that department that you're heading?
Well, because the large majority of people do not serve in uniform, they don't really realize how talented people who have been in uniform are. People in uniform get an enormous amount of authority and responsibility at a very early age. I did a package one time for NBC Nightly News aboard the George H.W. Bush when it was on its checkout cruise off of Norfolk. And my pitch was, you've got $60 trillion worth of equipment run by 19-year-old people.
Wow.
And all the people I interviewed and have made the cut was shown on Nightly News. They were all young people running all this equipment, launching and trapping FA-18s and refueling them and arming them and so on. And it doesn't occur to most people who don't serve how talented young people are and how much responsibility they get in uniform. I think one of the things I'm trying to accomplish at the New York Film Academy is to give veterans an opportunity to demonstrate what they know and their enormous creativity, discipline, focus, all the things they bring from being in uniform to the visual arts. And we're being really successful at it.
Incredible. Well, thank you. David, I wanted to ask you, because you were, you co-founded We Are the Mighty after really achieving great success in the industry, including a movie we did together that ended up being a hit. Thank you very much. But it's really such a pivot to go from, you know, the entertainment business to We Are the Mighty, and especially if you're not veterans. So I'm asking why, how, you know, you made that decision and build something, yeah, like that.
So, you know, as Colonel Jacobs said, there's so much talent within the military community, and as people leave the military, they really have they have very few outlets in entertainment. And something that I recognized after spending 30 years in entertainment was how few veterans that I met in all my years at MTV and Paramount and other places. I never met a veteran in a high level creative capacity. I never met somebody highly placed within development or production. Not to say that there weren't some old time vets, you know, that the World War II veterans and the Korean War veterans who sort of, as Colonel Jacobs said, almost everybody had some some relationship with the military, but not in this latest generation. And so it seemed like a really important thing to do, but also a really popular thing to do, because if you looked at the list of successful movies and TV shows, they always include tremendous number of military-oriented content of all different types and genres. And so I couldn't understand this dichotomy between all of the people who actually know how to tell those stories, can tell those stories, and the interest in those stories from civilians and military. And something like a third of the population of the United States is related in some way to somebody in the military. So it just felt like an opportunity to do a good thing, but also do something that seemed to be viable. And meeting people like Chase, who's, you know, to me is like the poster child of, you know, he's not a child anymore, but for me, it's like the ability to work with people of that character, of the kind of, you know, that have the storytelling capacity, can walk in a room and command attention, can work with a team. That's always the case. It just felt like amazing. It was truly the best, most incredible thing I've done in my career. And so I left We Are the Mighty about a year and a half ago, and I left it in the hands of particularly only veterans at this point. Mark Harper, who is the president of the company, is an Air Force veteran. Chase is a Marine and Army veteran. Augie Denal is a Navy veteran who was a Navy nuke when he was and he's the head of our production team. So like each of these people, as Colonel Jacobs said, brought to the to the company such incredible skills and knowledge, but also passion. So, you know, that's what happened, and I'm super proud of the whole team.
There's no question about it. And I'm just flashing that when we talk about bringing in diversity, I think veterans probably fall into that group, because it's not been, you know, an easy, they're not really invited, and we have to get it for them to be invited, I think, you know. I mean, I did a Q&A with Adam Driver, who, you know, was a Marine, and it's just shows you the kind of talent that is around, you know. And he only got to Juilliard because he was a veteran, you know. And I think we have to really ask and demand that more people should be really embraced in the industry. Chase, I wanted to ask you, and then last question, and then we go to the student. You're a chief content officer, right, of We Are the Mighty, but you came from a, you know, military background. At which point did you basically pivot to movies, you know, transition to being more in a creative capacity?
It's a good question. You know, I am the product of you know, Colonel Jacobs and David and others giving us opportunities. I would have never had an opportunity to come into the creative space had, you know, some of the groups and opportunities, you know, come in. So for that, I'm extremely grateful. You know, I had always grown up as a kid just watching movies. In fact, one of the reasons I joined the military is because I'd seen movies, you know, growing up in the 80s and 90s. I mean, you know, this is the Top Gun era, and the, you know, Few Good Men and others that are out there. And so, you know, I knew I wanted to serve in uniform, and in a world before 9/11, you know, that took a different, you know, had a different meaning. And I joined in June of 2001 and spent over a decade in uniform. And as I was coming to the end of that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I leaned back into what really was passionate for me. And I thought long and hard about, you know, where do I want to spend my time? And you know, the power of a story is really came down for me as you know, movies and shows were enough to get me to join, you know, early when I was young. And I thought, well, what other stories can we tell that can really make people, empower people? And so I fell back on that and did a documentary about an interpreter that I had served with overseas, and David Gale saw that film. It was my first film. I will admit I knew very little about production, and you know, cameras get pointed that way and hopefully it works. And so that was my first go. And so I thankfully was given the opportunity to come over and find other ways to tell not only military stories, but veteran stories, stories of service, and along the way learn the production elements. And you know, I'll just say on this show, we had so many veterans, both below the line, and we had veterans in the editing side of things. We had people placed that could help us keep it authentic. And we were able to bring the military world and the entertainment world together because we understood both. We knew how to communicate between both worlds. And I think that's what you see when you watch the show, is we knew what to ask for from the Army, and we also knew what we needed to be on the screen. And so we really leaned in on that.
Great, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the students. You know, and then maybe interact also in between. So Dave, Mike, can we open up to the student questions?
Absolutely. We have a question here from Kimberly Manguya. Kimberly, we've enabled you to unmute your microphone. What is your question for our guests?
Hi, thank you all for tonight, and thank you all for your service as well. It sounds like everyone's a veteran pretty much. I myself am a veteran. I'm retiring this year, and I am interested in getting into screenwriting as well as documentary filmmaking and producing, but I have no experience. I was wondering what your recommendations are for training. Are there some courses that you recommend over there others, or Is it just find a good program and stick with it?
Who
Well,
wants to answer?
I'll say one thing, which is Chase briefly mentioned how he did it. And I thought that was one way, which is a relatively personal way of taking a step. So Chase told the story of a captain who he had worked with in the Iraqi army, and it was very affecting and moving. You know, I don't really recall in many ways how technically brilliant it was, but I think it was pretty good. And his brother happens to be a cinematographer, so he was lucky there. But that was what it was all about. To get my attention and why I even hired Chase was it stuck with me forever. I mean, to the point where when I met Chase serendipitously at a place and he said, I made this documentary, I'm like, you made that documentary? It was almost like meant to be, but it was really about telling a very personal story, in his case, about you know, his counterpart in the Iraqi army. And it was so, you know, such a powerful story. So if you have a great story to tell, and this is documentaries, but also scripted content, then you just have to be able to articulate that. It could be done through a documentary, like without a script per se. And in this case, you know, if Chase wants to talk about it, he can. But if you're writing a screenplay, then of course there are huge rules and things that you have to follow. And that's what New York Film Academy is about, right? Like, you do not just jump into writing a screenplay or a teleplay or a pilot or learning how to shoot a camera. That's what the school has to make you do. There are people who learn it on their own. And then there's the storytelling side, which to some degree you have to have something in you to say. And so that's my particular take on it.
Yeah, you know, the New York Film Academy has an entire course of study on screenwriting, where people learn to, I mean, it's a skill that you have to learn just like any other skill.
Yeah.
Kimberly, I'd add there too. I mean, and thank you for your service. You know, in the military, it's very easy to understand people's jobs and what our experiences is, because you can see it on our uniforms, right? Or, you know, there's paperwork that you can look at very quickly, and you know, you have a general idea of who you are. That's not the same way. And so as you think about your next step, and, you know, whether it's the screenwriting or documentary films, you know, your creative work is going to be your calling card. It's going to be the first look that people have to who you are and what you want to be. So I would, you know, I agree with Colonel Jacobs, is you got to spend the time getting in and learning the skill set, and then reading and watching. Like there is a part of this where your job becomes to watch and study what is on screen, so you can figure out how it was made. And it's you know, once you get into it, it is a fascinating process, but it's about gathering those skill sets so that you can be effective.
There are also a lot of skills that people who've served in the military might have that are relevant. Actually, Mark Harper, who's the president of We Are the Mighty, was in he was combat camera in the Air Force. So he actually had certain number of skills, and he always wanted to be in entertainment. So, but there are others who are behind the scenes, people who are doing things that sort of are related to film and making film below the line, lots of below the line jobs that really could take those skills. And sometimes they're very direct, and sometimes they're indirect, about organization or, you know, leading a group in a particular way. And I think it's about making sure that you find what your passion is, and then figure out what skills you might have acquired in the military that will help you get that first step in, you know, because it's a very closed world and people always want experience. And one of the things that I felt was really unfortunate for veterans was some of you have spent 4 years, 10 years, 20 years in the military, and you walk into an entertainment company and are like, oh, you're going to get me coffee today. And so that's just not something that most people want to have to deal with. It may be something you have to deal with. You might have to take that first step and then prove that you can do much, much more. But I felt that, and that's the case. And so many of the veterans who worked at We Are the Mighty, or work at We Are the Mighty, and on our productions, hadn't had the experience that somebody who spent, you know, went to film school right out of high school did. but they made up for that in sort of practical understanding and sort of ability to interact in ways and a maturity that others don't have. You just have to convince people, that you do apply those skills.
Thank you.
We have a question here from Cody Morgan. Cody, we've enabled you to unmute your microphone. What is your question for our guests? Well, it looks like we're having difficulty enabling Cody's microphone, so I will pose the question. So there's two questions, actually. First is just a general question about filming this docuseries and what it felt like to shoot this film. But secondly, how do you find your style in a docuseries and in this film or for this this series?
I can start with that. I can tell you it felt very cold because we shot it in November. The first day was a lot colder than any of us thought. So we ran the crew with 2 cameras, 12 hours a day. We had to work within all of the regulations of, hours that people would be on set, and we had to match that with how the training was going. And we had to be very cognizant and aware of how a camera crew was going to affect the training. So we were constantly asking and coordinating behind the scenes with the Army leaders of, hey, what is happening today? What can we be involved in? What is happening tomorrow? What should we be planning for? And so it was a constant behind the scenes conversation. And that allowed us to capture as much as we possibly could. And we were sending drives from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, full of footage back to Los Angeles every night. We were shipping them overnight so that we could get the latest footage to the editors by the time they woke up in the morning. And tonally, we didn't know exactly what the show was going to look like when we started. We had to work with the network. But one of the things that we did early on was we hired a showrunner who was on the ground a lot of the time, who had worked on live PD and knew the style of being very emotional and visceral and being as close to the subjects as possible. And we really knew we wanted to replicate some of that. And so as a gentleman named Chris Rowe, fantastic director, he's storyteller. His father was a veteran of Vietnam, so he understood what we were trying to achieve, and so it was about hiring the right team to help us achieve that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We do have a question here from Jim. Jim asks, were there any veterans on the production and film crew?
Yeah, there were. So you have me, so that's one, and then you have also a Navy veteran, and this was the running joke throughout the entire production is, we finally put a Navy veteran through Army boot camp. So he was our story producer, was on the ground watching every day to make sure that all of our characters, we were getting the storylines that we wanted, that we were looking for the types of footage that were out there, whether it would be drone or long shots or close-ups or whatever it was. He was helping us figure that out. And then we had a veteran who was working on our sound and coordination there. And then in the post-production house, we had a few veterans that were editors. And that was the first upfront, that was the actual production. I should add too that, there's so many phases of this, from the development to the production, all the way to delivering to the network and the marketing. And so one of the things we were able to do afterwards as well, as we started getting ready to market the show, we hired more veterans to help us look through the footage, create other pieces of content, and make sure that it had an authentic voice to it.
Excellent. There's actually a follow-up question to that, asking if there were any storylines or any troops during shooting that stood out as stars of the program, and if so, why?
Yeah, and I'll let Colonel Jacobs and David, go into this too, because we all had to watch the footage without seeing people in real life, so it's hard to look at that. But there were 2 that stood out to me. There was a very young mother from Fresno, California, who had joined the Army, had left her child at home and joined the Army. And within a matter of, I think it was days, we could see that she was really starting to rise. And this was the first time in her life where she felt like she was part of a team. We also had a very young soldier straight out of high school who I don't think he'd ever left home. So his eyes were about this big on that first night. And by the end of it, you see him really come through and really have some confidence in himself. So,
Yeah, I think one of the things you can say for certain is that if you're in a military unit of any size, you're going to be spoiled for choice to find characters. I mean, you got 42 people in a platoon, you're going to have 42 characters. And it's going to be difficult to choose among them. I think the single biggest problem is trying to figure out who you're going to choose to focus on, because there are so many characters. Don't forget, you've got a cross section of the United States from all over, all coming together, being put under pressure, all at the same time, in the same place. You're going to have a hard time choosing among all the characters you have to choose from.
Right.
We have a question here from Colonel Lan Dalat. Colonel, we've enabled you to unmute your microphone. What is your question for our guests?
Oh, good evening. I'm currently on active duty here, and I'm an amateur filmmaker. Love to tell stories of soldiers, and currently I'm cadre at cadet at Texas A&M Corps of Cadets here, and every week I'm trying to highlight a story of each of the cadets and how they are overcome challenges in their hometown and whatnot, and to join a member of the cadet corps and soon to be Army officer. But anyways, my question is really, how do I get involved in this production so that I, can tell more of these stories about the Army?
Well, I guess Chase, you and I should probably tag team on this one a little bit, because me, from the entertainment executive, experienced person in my whole career, unlike you, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to serve. My father served, but so many of us in this industry are really unaware of those stories that you're talking about. And so I will say that, there's first that barrier of getting through the door, getting into the door. And I think, that's like everything. It's networking, it's having something to show for it. And even people who aren't in the military, have obstacles. So, it's if you've been shooting content and you have great stories, finding a way to package that into something that's consumable by somebody. And then it's really about that networking to find the people who might be relevant for what you want to do. And it's not just anybody. If you're talking about somebody who's making, let's say, horror films, like, we talked about Blumhouse, and that's what they do. Well, they might, if they're a family friend or somebody from other walks of life, might be able to tell you who to speak to. But it's really about getting to people who are doing the kinds of things you want to do and you think you could do. And there's so many pathways to get there. There's no one magic thing. Again, going to school, and having classes that also, I know, because I've spoken at New York Film Academy and others as well. Part of what they do is sort of introduce you to the people who make those decisions, get you a familiarity with how the business works. Because if you don't know that, then you look quite naive, and then people will not sort of be open to you. So I think it's about educating yourself about the business, using the resources that you have, and learning a lot before you sort of take that first shot. It's probably similar things that you do in any profession. And Chase, who's actually gone through exactly what you're asking, has his own personal approach, but all the veterans that we've worked with at We Are the Mighty have their own story. None of them just came out of their military experience and walked in the door someplace.
I'll just echo that. I mean, as David said, there's no one path, right? So you have to find yours, and the fact that you're getting an opportunity to create now in your current role is amazing. So lean in as hard as you can, and really figure out what part of the process you really really enjoy, whether that's picking up the camera, whether it's finding the stories, whether it's the editing side of it. That'll help guide you along the way. And then, as David said, I mean, it's about networking and really on the job training. So, just a personal anecdote for me, as I was getting out, before I had ever gone into production, I'd never even considered it, to be quite honest. I sat down with my little brother and wanted to learn as much as I could about one of his productions, and I watched, and in my mind, I was just happy to be there. And I might have been one of the most overqualified PAs, but that the knowledge I learned out of that was gold for me, because it showed me, here are all the pieces of how this comes together. And so from that, I was able to say, okay, here's how I want to go into the next step, which was leading a production, and how do I get there? And as David said, you learn and you network. And so don't be afraid to find those people that that are out there doing what you're doing, and reach out.
There's also organizations, one in particular, Veterans in Entertainment. What is it called these days? Chase?
Veterans in Media and Entertainment, VME.
Yes, they changed their name. Veterans in Media and Entertainment is really the biggest one, and that's something you join, and there's continuous sort of information provided, access to sort of potential internships or grants or other ways to sort of learn about the industry and how to enter it.
Thank you. We have a question here from Hanan Jaraji. Hanan, we've gone ahead and enabled you to unmute your microphone. What is your question for our guests? We might be having trouble with this mic. I'll go ahead and ask this for him. So the question is, I'm a lawyer in Brazil, and 1 year ago I made a career transition, and I'm currently working on independent films, which is a passion of mine. I'm an enthusiast of Army productions, and I'm curious what the main points that must be necessarily taken into consideration for military film production.
Chase, that's all you.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on the military, to be the first question. But for our process, one of the big things that we had as part of the team, as Colonel Jacobs has mentioned, is we were able to go to the top levels in the military and ask for access. That was crucial in not only helping us set up the show, but it was crucial in being able to execute. We found ourselves very quickly in a big problem when we first started the show, and that was the network wanted us to deliver in a very tight time frame, and the Army was not ready for us to show up at their doorstep, and so we had to find ways to get through that. And I think one of the ways that we were able to successfully do that is we had a plan, we knew what we wanted to shoot, we knew what to ask for, and so we and the veterans on the team helped us put this plan together, is to say, what is the best way to go into the training so that we can capture it without overstepping our bounds. And so, the real specifics of this was around timing. It got very hard for us to get drone shots, because that requires a lot of approval on a military base. We had to get people cleared to go on base. We had to make sure that when we were there, that we were safe, and that we put people at night in the middle of the woods. We put people on top of towers. There were some live fire elements along the way as well. So we had to do all the right things to make sure that the team could not only execute, but be there safely, and at the same time keep the trust of the Army.
Thank you so much. We have a question here from Eric. He asks, Colonel Jacobs and Chase, when developing this content, did you experience some nostalgia from your time in the service? And what was your most memorable moment?
I've got nothing but memorable moments, is all I can tell you. I forgot what happened last week, but everything that happened to me from the time I put the uniform on till the time I took it off, I could remember, well, almost all of it. Anytime I go, I can tell you something. I always feel better when I'm around people who've worn the uniform or who are wearing the uniform. I feel like a completely different person than I do otherwise. I've been retired for over 30 years, and yet it's if I'm around people who are veterans or people who are serving, it's just like I'm right back in uniform again. It never leaves you. It's like riding a bicycle. It's really quite astonishing. Maybe it's because things that happen to you when you're really young stay with you. But I think it's the unique experience of being part of something that's bigger than you and being with a bunch of people who are trying really hard to accomplish a mission and to take care of each other. There's nothing in the world like it.
Yeah, I'll have to echo Colonel Jacobs there. I mean, when I was the first night of filming, I mean, it was very early in the morning and the buses arrived and you are going right into it. And there was a big part of me that wanted to be down on that cold ground doing push-ups with them. And there was also a part of me that said, no way, I don't want to do that anymore. But I immediately felt that sense of camaraderie, and you could see it from day one all the way through the 10 weeks. And when we watched all 5 of our recruits, and I will give that part away because it's still a good story to see all the things they went through. We watched all 5 graduate. I was incredibly proud because we had not only gotten to see their personal transformations, but just how much it meant to be part of America's Army, and that they're on to their next career as soldiers in that. And I'm excited for that.
Thank you so much. I have a question here from Andrew. He says that this question is for everybody on the screen and is curious what draws you to work on a specific project and turn down others.
Well, somebody who's turned down a project ought to answer. I don't turn down
anything. I turn down almost everything. So I guess
we'd make a pretty good team, I think.
So next time I need a positive answer, I'm coming to you. And if you want a rejection, come to me. But I think that, it's a combination. It depends on what part of the business you're in. If you're working for yourself as a producer and you really just want to do things that you're passionate about, there's no answer to that except what speaks to you. If you're like me, who's also been an executive and my job is to choose projects and movies and TV, it really depends on what that job is. For 18 years, I worked at MTV. So while I was a lot older than the audience we were serving, I was making things like Jackass and Beavis and Butthead. I was way too old for that. And, a movie like Varsity Blues, which I did with Tova, that's a good example. I'm going to use that one because it's Tova. So Tova can speak more about like the number of years she went carting around with this script, which was a script that had been, at that point when you brought it to me, maybe 10 years old or something, Tova. Yeah. So a lot of rejection along the way,
Paramount rejected it 3 times.
3 times.
And then they bought it. And so, we did it within 24 hours. Yeah.
So it comes to me, Tova sends it to, maybe you sent it, maybe it was directly to me, but I, of course, didn't know Tova. And what we do is we give it to some junior person whose job it is to read it. And in this case, she read it and she says, David, you need to read this. And I'm like, really? Like it's 10 years old. What? And she's, no, you just need to read it. There's something really great here. So first I had the validation of somebody much younger than me, which was good. And secondly, she was enthusiastic. And so I read it and it immediately felt like a movie. And while it was a little dated at the time, we had just started, we'd only been running MTV Films a couple of years, and our whole mission was to make movies that resonated with young people. And I hadn't seen a football movie that spoke to that generation in quite some time, maybe All the Right Moves or something with Tom Cruise 10 years earlier. And so we just loved it, and we actually got it to one of the, to a director and producer team, Mike Tolan and Brian Robbins. And Brian had done some movies for Paramount, a movie for Paramount, I think, I'm trying to remember which one, the last one, Good Burger or something. And the studio read it, I'm like, with Brian, these guys are real sports guys with the script. MTV Films is looking for stuff. And as Tova said, they wanted to make it quickly. And so lots of other anecdotal stories.
Because it was competing with my other project at Imagine, which was Friday Night Light.
Oh yeah, that's right. We got out there first for sure. And, but, you know, obviously inspired, you know, to a large degree that the success of that book was something that sort of also put it in the, in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, I got a similar story, and it points out a point that you made, David. I think no matter what you're doing and no matter how good you are, you got to be prepared for some measure of rejection. I've got a friend who was about a fifth-rate book agent in London, and he had to share an office with some other people. I mean, every once in a while he'd get a book that'd make him a couple of bucks, but that was all. Not very much success. He was going on a long weekend up with his girlfriend to go up to Scotland, and he was going to ride a train, and he figured he'd have to read something on the train. He went by his secretary's desk, which was piled high with manuscripts, and just took one off the top. This manuscript had been rejected by every agent and every publisher, almost every publisher in the English-speaking world.
mm-hmm.
And he read it on the way up to Scotland. When he got there, he turned right around and came back to bring it to a publisher. It was Harry Potter. I mean, you just got to keep working at it, man. And it's got, and your other point, Dave, it's got to speak to you. If it speaks to you, it's probably something worth looking into.
Thank you so much. We have a question here from one of our students from our LA campus, Michael Kunzelman. Michael, we've enabled you to unmute your microphone. What is your question for our guests?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what made you guys decide on the Army as opposed to the other branches when you did the documentary?
Well, I had access to the Army. As a matter of fact, I went down to Fort Benning because Ray Odierno told me to go down there and talk to the guy who was the assistant commandant of the infantry school, who at the time happened to be, I think he was either a promotable brigadier general or just been promoted to major general, who was H.R. McMaster, whom I also had known before. So, and I'm a soldier. So yeah, we focused on the Army, but I'll tell you an ancillary story. I was at a big fundraising dinner for some charity in New York on the Intrepid, and I was sitting next to the chief of information of the Marine Corps. This is after we got started doing this project. And he said, "What are you up to?" And I told him. He said, "What do we chop liver? As soon as you're finished with this, you got to come over and do the Marine Corps." There's a lot of networking involved, but the principal reason, the only reason we started with the Army was because I'm a soldier.
And of course, Chase has to do the Marine Corps one because he's both a soldier and he's a Marine veteran. So
I started as a Marine and then ended up in the Army. So, you know, I got
the triumph of hope over experience is my
exactly
my evaluation.
But to Girdle Jacobs' point, I mean, we would love to do the other services, and, you know, and timing is always a thing too, right? So, you know, it just so happened that the Navy had come out with a series the year before, and it was a YouTube series, and you know, there was really a need not only from the Army's perspective, but as we were working with the first network, Quibi, they wanted younger, action-oriented stuff, and it just felt that the Army was the right place to do it. And we went back and forth on which base that was going to be and timing and all of that, but there was never a no. It was always how or when.
Thank you so much. We have a question here that seems to be the obvious question of the night, which is when and where can we see the series?
There you go.
there we go. I was waiting for that one. For those of you who don't know the long, sad story of Quibi, you should read about it because it's one of the sort of, it will go down in history as one of the sort of more interesting failures, you know, and people at the highest level in the industry, in this case, Jeffrey Katzenberg, can fail. So something to feel better about, right? Because this is a man who has had tremendous success. Anyway, Quibi went under in November, just at the time they were supposed to release 10 weeks. And about a month ago, all Quibi's content was sold to Roku. So the good news, I think, for the show, even though sort of like I'm accused of always looking at the bright side, is that Roku is in something like 60 million homes. It's free to view. Quibi was a brand new entity that was going to be selling subscriptions, and who knew, right? It wasn't going to be Disney Plus this year. So it's going to come out, I'm pretty certain. We don't know exactly when, but they're going to be releasing the content. So if you've got a Roku device, which is, like I said, it's in something like 60 million homes, and because it's all you have to have is a device, it will appear on this. I'm pretty certain. I mean, I don't work for them, so I can't promise it, but I'm pretty sure it will come out this year.
And if you don't have Roku, then Roku, how are you going to watch it?
Well, you know, it's like $39 to get a Roku device. So, you know, and they might, their original programming might even be available through like your traditional, you know, if you have a cable provider or something like that. Almost all the cable providers have access to the Roku content as well. It will be available to almost everybody. Again, even much more so than Quibi would have been.
And I'll just add, and this is, you know, this was a good reminder for me coming out of the military, is that nothing goes to plan, and it's all about having contingencies. And so, and we actually had to walk through this with a lot of our other partners. And so when something didn't work, you know, whether it was on the production side or marketing or I mean, we were very close to launching with Quibi. I mean, weeks away. You know, there was a period where we could have just stopped and said, this is too frustrating. But no one ever did that. No one on the team ever. We just looked at what's our next option and how do we solve this problem. And I think that goes back to the very beginning of what Colonel Jacobs and Val and David and I were trying to build a team that can see this through all the way from the idea all the way to distributing out there. And so I'm excited to see it come out soon, but we'll keep fighting.
Thank you so much. We have a question here from John. Says, Colonel Jacobs, thank you for your service. I'm wondering if you've written any other books that might be considered as possible films, but also what types of services and support does the New York Film Academy provide to veterans?
My first book was published in 2008 and is still in print. It's a memoir called If Not Now, When? It's got an astonishing photograph of me at a very early age with an AK-47 and no shirt on. It's probably more information than you require. I don't know if that would make a particularly good movie, but they'd have to get somebody who's young and attractive to play me in any case. The New York Film Academy has the capability to do absolutely everything in the visual arts, from start to finish, screenwriting, production, from shooting a movie to editing it and everything in between. It's one of those places which, if it didn't exist, you'd have to invent, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to get the kind of education that you can get there. So it's got absolutely everything. I think the Film Academy has open houses from time to time in non-COVID situations. As a matter of fact, I think they do in any case remotely. A great place, and I've got a lot of friends there many of whom become tremendously successful. And they also have a lot of which is really instructive, a great number of master classes from people who are names you would recognize. If you go on the site, you can see absolutely everything they can do.
Thank you so much. Tova, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to you. Before we wrap up, I know you have some questions.
Most of the questions were actually answered, I have to say. And I think that I learned a lot from it, and I'm sure everybody else learned a lot from it. I wanted to tell the last person that Marty Scorsese's daughter took the Film Academy summer program because she was only 12 when she started. And she did it 3 years in a row. And I ran into Marty and he was so proud. And he said that the reason why he liked the Film Academy, he said his daughter went in a week, she shot a movie. By the end of the week, she shot a movie. And he said, good or bad, she shot a movie. She learned how to do a movie. And she learned the skills and the tools. And, you know, after that, it was up to her to improve it. And so then she came the next year and she did it again. So, you know, you can do a year, you can do 2 years, you can do a month, you can do, you know, whatever your schedule permits you. And I think you're going to learn the tools that will help you for what you need and desire in the movie business. I wanted to thank everybody that came here today. I can't wait to see the series. I hope that you even continue and do more, because I think there's something really authentic about it and interesting, and it's opening a world. And I think that it will really attract a lot of other people. So I wish you a lot of success. I may have to buy a Roku. I just bought Apple TV. But anyway, thank you all, you know, Colonel Jack, David Gale, my old friend, Chase, thank you so much. I also want to thank the people from the Veteran Department of the New York Film Academy that actually came up with the idea to do it. Jim Miller, John Powers, Eric Brown, and to the crew here, Mike Caputo, Zach, and in marketing, Katie and Helen. So it takes a village even to do something like this, especially when we're dealing with those incredible panelists, big names. So thank you so much. Wish you success and can't wait to see your series, and please continue on. And let's hope that a lot more veterans get into the business, because I think there's so many good stories to tell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tova.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.